same sentiment that, well, really an acknowledgement of the people that are here and an invitation. So the acknowledgement is that by virtue of my job, I get to travel, and it's wonderful, and I get to meet a lot of people who have big titles and they have big budgets. And when I really sit back and I reflect on the folks I get to talk to, I don't often get to talk to a crowd like this. So most of my folks, they do things, but not that much. You guys actually do things. You are doing something that I think is incredibly important, and it's really humbling. And I really am sincere when I say this is a very important event for me to be able to come and address you and maybe think about curriculum and you know the limited area where we overlap. The invitation would be reach out to me at any time. I want to help in any way that I can. So if you think that I might have something that I could offer your students or you, take me up on the offer. So I'm going to end with that too. I'm sincere about that. I've got a few slides to go through, but I thought it might be fun to start with something like this. Yeah, that's not science. That's Hollywood, but it's amusing, and you know, I think that there's an underpinning of truth in this food. We have a problem. We have a significant problem. That has drawn me to my industry, and you know, somebody wise once said, "Before you tell me what you know, tell me why you care." Well, so that's why I care. I care for the same reasons you do, the same reasons that you're contributing to the youth and to your students and to your families. I know why you care, and that's why I care as well. This is not science nor Hollywood, but this is real life. So that's March 19, 2015. That's President Obama, of course. Katie Brandt is the federal chief sustainability officer. She's in the background. President Obama is signing an executive order that leads to federal sustainability in the next decade. So that executive order was the genesis for IoEnergy. We got together and said, you know, there's a good why behind why we might want to build a company around this, but there's also, to some extent, there's gold in our hills. There is some big stuff happening at the executive level, at the federal level, around sustainability. There's an awareness that the planet may be in trouble. And what can we do to be a part of the solution? So I'll tell you more about IoEnergy and a little bit about what we're doing. So as I mentioned, just a short time ago, this Executive Order 13693 was signed. We got to thinking, well, that's interesting. There's 360,000 federally owned or operating buildings. That's a pretty big market. And what's interesting is that of the buildings that get the attention for a sustainability officer or an energy manager or even an engineer to operate the building, those are large buildings, 250,000 square feet or larger. 87% of the federal portfolio is under 50,000 square feet. So 50,000 square feet is probably you know, a half or a third of the size of this complex, right? This building that we're in right now. So they're small, and when they're small, you can't justify having a chief sustainability officer or an energy manager or even an engineer to run your building. It's just kind of have to run itself. But that's how the federal government, that's their footprint. And if you think of that as an example of all commercial buildings, it kind of rings true throughout. I mean, they're all small. So we created IoEnergy. This executive order was the first targeted niche. And then one of the things we talked about was the idea of alternative fuels. And we've heard of solar as the most common alternative fuel to electricity. We can generate electricity a lot of different ways with solar. It's a great alternative fuel. Well, conservation really should be the first fuel, according to us. That the cheapest and most effective way to save, to reduce your consumption would be to not spend in the first place. So a little catchphrase would be to optimize before you energize. Optimize your building before you energize it with solar, geothermal, whatever. So that was kind of an edict that we embraced, in addition to having this first target. And then we got to think about this market economy, what's happening in the world. And we said, let's build a company around where the Internet of Things intersects with energy efficiency. So that was the idea behind the genesis of the company. And I think it might be helpful when I talk about the Internet of Things, let's just kind of define what I'm talking about. So first you've got the Internet. The information superhighway, we're all aware of it, it's changed our lives, mostly for the better. So 1990, it's 1990, I mean, I have things in my closet that are that old. The Internet is quite new still. 1995, Internet Explorer was first released. And so in 27 years, we've developed the Internet, this information superhighway, into this really polished, excellent device for delivering information to us. So, banking apps, and, I mean, it's pretty first class. So, the Internet of Things. Well, I think of it, and I don't know if that's a perfect example, but that's the next version. So the Internet of Things is going to augment our own intelligence by having machine-to-machine communication and decision-making, kind of removing the layer of the human from the transaction. So you might be thinking of artificial intelligence, and yeah, sure, but really, it doesn't have to be that sophisticated. When the first generation of the Internet presents itself, it's all about interfacing with you, providing you with information. This next generation would be to take a layer of work away from you and let benign things happen in the background. So this Internet of Things is fascinating, and it's massive. GE predicts that the industrial component of the Internet of Things is a $60 trillion market. So that's just a staggering number. And that's in the next 15 years. So, wow. If you're going to make a company, why not work on saving the planet? Why not get into a $60 trillion market and do what our leaders have asked us to do? So that was the genesis of this company, and we're small, but we're on our way to something that we think is very important. So what is an Internet of Things building? What is it that we're actually doing? It can take a lot of forms, but I think this graphic is pretty illustrative of how a pretty deep building retrofit might work. And so again, to define a term, a retrofit would be taking an existing building that has attributes that are stale, inefficient, and you upgrade the existing infrastructure. You retrofit with new and modern stuff. So in this case, you've got light fixtures. Well, first the structure stays, the cubes stay, everything really stays. You don't necessarily have a problem with your building operation. It's just consuming too much. You want to use efficiency as that first fuel. So the stuff we go for are these troffer fixtures. These are fluorescent 2 foot by 4 foot troffers. You'd see in every building. Usually they have 3 fluorescent tubes in them. Sometimes they've been improved to have just 2. But in every case, they're fluorescent. So what we're doing is we're modifying this to an LED fixture. If there's an aesthetic problem that people think it's stale and ugly, we can make it pretty with a retrofit kit that has some presence to it. Or if it's fine, we just leave it there and we put in some LED tubes that are driven by their own little driver. And I brought a tube and some goodies to kind of look at. But then we're also, in many cases, we're adding a sensor. And that sensor carries a profile that creates a zone of just that one fixture. So if you think of that fixture, it goes from being just a dumb part in a building to an icon on a computer screen. So you now have control over this fixture with a sensor. The sensor carries a profile that says when it's midnight on a Tuesday, I'll tell my fixture to be off. When it's noon on a Tuesday, I'll tell my fixture to be on, but dim, unless somebody walks under me, and then I'll dim up. So I could be off at noon on a Tuesday, but that might communicate to the world that there's a maintenance problem or we're not open for business. So, you know, we might program it however we want, but in this case we'd say it's just burning energy at 20% capacity, saying I'm open, I'm on, and when somebody comes by, it dims itself up, maybe to 100% power, or more often, not to 100% power, because it's overlit. There's more light than we need. Let's maybe trim it up when occupied to 60% power, and that's plenty. So each little sensor can carry its own profile. In this case, this common area, you group them all the same, and maybe that one sensor can trigger all of his or her brothers and sisters, or you have them all operating independently. So by adding these little sensors, you can imagine we're adding a lot of expense, but that expense is offset by that energy savings. You can imagine that for most of the working day, these little light fixtures are going to be sitting at 10%, 15% power, and unless they're needed. So if you can get 80% savings out of a light fixture that's already efficient, you can pay for a lot of sensors. So that's kind of this paradigm. How do they're wired to the fixture, and they don't rely on batteries or anything. But then they report periodically to a little gateway, a router. And that router goes down to an interface. There's a graphical user interface you log into. And you have now a very efficient building. The sensor detects occupancy, light level, temperature. Temperature is extensible to HVAC systems, so you can only heat or cool the parts of the building that are occupied and kind of send the energy where it's needed. And this works. The math is perfect. You get a pretty good return on investment for this type of thing. That's somewhere around a 5 or a 6 year payback for your investment. Awesome. This is a good business model. This front end, this energy efficiency, in many ways, is a Trojan horse for the real thing that's going on in the background. That real thing is a big data platform. So yes, it pays for itself, and yes, it's efficient, and yes, we're going to reduce the carbon footprint and hopefully save the planet. But what's really fascinating is that now you have just this massive data collection opportunity at a very, very granular basis. One every 100 square feet, you have a little sentinel watching what's happening underneath her 24 hours a day. So regardless of whether that sensor is told to turn the light on or off, it's watching to see what happens. It's measuring temperature, it's measuring activity, light level. That data is valuable. Let me tell you, from an Internet of Things standpoint, that is really valuable, and in many cases more valuable than that energy efficiency. So by way of further example, so think you're operating a building in Manhattan. You've got 25 floors. You know your building is probably 40% occupied at any one time, but it's really hard to know which 40%. And if, let's say you're running a bank, and anybody with a VP title gets an office, and an EVP title gets a corner office, and the CEO gets the top floor, you just give that by virtue of title, regardless of how it's used. But what if you now have sensors in there that are feeding you big data? And you can say, Danny, we understand that you're a VP, and we understand you're entitled to an office, but friend, you're only there for 12% of the time, and of that time, you were in and out, just between 9 and 11 in the morning. Wouldn't it be okay if you gave up your office, and we'll give you something nice over here just to kind of park? But if you can do that to consolidate offices and maybe make more conference rooms, or even consolidate floors where the engineering department goes and marries up with the marketing department because they only need half the floor. A whole floor of a building in Manhattan is worth far more than that energy efficiency. We're talking millions of dollars annually that you can now sublet to a new tenant. So this big data platform is important. Think of it perhaps as a life safety thing. There's a gas leak in a school, and the fire marshal wants to know, is the school vacant? And we think it is until you realize, oh my goodness, in the classroom in the back, we've got some activity. You can see it on the floor plan. So this is valuable stuff, this big data. So the Internet of Things is really in its infancy, particularly in the commercial world where I live, but it's coming on quickly. Any questions on this before I move on? We will have time for questions at the end, too. But, yeah?
I'm just wondering what DR is.
Oh, DR, great question. Demand response is this wonderful concept that says, let's say we've got 8 power plants in California. During peak times, we really need 10. Most of the time we need 8, sometimes we only need 4. But 8's really the right number. In order to run California, you gotta have 10, because of those peak times. So what if we had a way to shed load during real high demand times when it's 108 degrees and every AC is running? So if you could send a demand response signal out to the communities, and all the lights dim an extra little bit, and non-critical HVAC tunes from 70 degrees to 74 degrees. If you could send that response out, you don't need to build new power plants. You're in a better situation. So demand response, great question, thank you. Okay, so this is, I mentioned those little light fixtures. Now each one of those little LED light fixtures is an icon on a computer screen. And if you were to take your mouse and you kind of hover over one of those, up comes a little window where that sensor now speaks directly to the router, and it tells you the temperature there, whether it's occupied or unoccupied, the light level, even a utility grade power meter that says, here's how much energy I'm consuming at a granular basis. Or if you left click and you select a whole bunch of them, you can find out what that whole zone is doing. You could turn them off, on, you could reprogram, give them your profile. That's what a real life floor plan looks like in some of these buildings we're working in. Again, the paradigm is a pay for itself paradigm. This is money for nothing. You pay initially, and the revenue that you get back is energy savings off your PG&E. So here's a bar graph of kind of the before situation, and this is on hours of a day. We could set it up to be really any time period, but this is like a 1-day period, and you can see how this building. This is the light, the energy when the lights were on. The before you put sensors in is the height of the bar, and that's how much the building consumed with lights on before we showed up. After we show up, you've got that baseline of what the building used to consume. Now the actual consumption is down here. So at, I don't have my glasses, but whatever time of day that is, that's 1 a.m. There's some lights that are burning, whereas they all would be burning. There is, as the building comes up for business, more and more lights turn on, and the energy consumption is still lower because remember, we've task tuned them down. Even when it's occupied, they're not burning at 100% power. They're burning at, there's a peak reduction. And then when the sun comes by, the sensor detects, oh, there's ambient light, there's daylight that I can harvest. We'll dim the lights even more because there's sun coming in. So you can see this great energy savings, and at that moment, the savings was 60% off the baseline. Pretty significant number. Again, all designed to pay for itself very quickly. So again, back to that footprint of icons on the screen. You've got we've got metrics now where we can kind of run a clock, and you can start to see when the lights turn on, when they're occupied, when they're not. And that big data becomes more and more interesting as you start to visualize and conceptualize, what am I going to do with this data? You can come up with stuff like this. This is an occupancy map. So it looks like a heat map, like it's really hot right here, but really that's occupancy intensity. So you might say, well, wow, this is like super hot. What possibly could that be? That's the kitchenette right there, believe it or not. That's where everybody goes. And you can measure this in just a few minutes, or you could say the whole month, a year. This usage intensity is very revealing, and this might tell a building operator that says, where the executives sit over here, we need to repurpose this. Maybe make a better kitchenette or something. But being able to visualize data is so important, and to me that's relevant to your students. Some of your students will have a bend towards coding and visualization of data. And some of them, hard sciences are mildly interesting, but boy, you can tell this is the next enterprising entrepreneur. Well, this is an area where I'm telling you that market of industrial IoT is going to be massive, and it will touch all of our lives. And it's a wonderful place to steer young people. I know there's a question in the back.
Yeah, so I don't know if, I know at our school, this is steering them towards coding and that. It's not happening because the teachers, we don't necessarily know how to do that, right? It's not built in our curriculum. So, and I've been struggling with this at our school, like we're creating a new curriculum, but we're not bringing in new technologies because the people building the new curriculum have been teaching for 30 years, you know? So, do you think they're going to get this in junior college? Do you think they're going to get, I mean, where are they going to get, what, first of all, what skills do they need? And then,
It's a great question.
how do we change
I
it?
have an opinion, it's just anecdotal, it's just one man's opinion, but this is similar to the hot rodding that was done in my dad's era, where, you know, it's just a passion and people are just hacking and doing their thing, and it's really self-taught still.
Yes, yes.
And then at some point, it becomes embraced, and there's a whole industry around aftermarket cars now, where people realize there's a huge opportunity with passion around hot rodding, and the industry built around it. And I still don't know that it's reached back into middle school and high school curriculums, but if that analogy works at all, I think really it's self-taught right now. And that is a shame. And I think your voices matter. This is a gift you can give to future generations if you can support their passions around something that could be incredibly lucrative and also help save the planet with energy efficiency and sustainability. So very incomplete answer, but you know, it begins with a couple voices.
Yeah.
So back to that typical building. So this is a Social Security office in Vermont, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. I took that picture. These are these little troffers, and these have 3 fluorescent T8 lamps in there. Each T8 lamp burns 32 watts. So 32 watts is a little ballast factor that adjusts. But basically, you're talking 100 watts per fixture. There's a mechanical timer that turns it on at 6 a.m. The whole building turns on, the meter starts spinning, and at 7 p.m. the mechanical timer turns it off. And if somebody happens to come in on a Sunday, they go to the breaker or the timer, they override it. And that's how these 87% of buildings, smallish buildings, are operating day in and day out, day in and day out. So there's a massive opportunity. You know, you can see there's a lot of these fixtures in just this one building, multiplied by 360,000 buildings. It's a huge opportunity. I'll tell you that almost all of these decisions are economic. They're based upon cost to operate, and they're done at the VP of facilities level or at the real estate level. They're not done at the CFO level, and they should be, or even at the portfolio energy manager level. These decisions are always economic. It should be based on greenhouse gas reduction targets or occupant comfort or pride of ownership. But in fact, it's always a business case. And so that's another, I know it blends outside of STEM, but to encourage your students to pursue statistics and business case and being able to articulate complex data simply and in a compelling fashion. It takes emotional intelligence. It takes you know, the whole gamut of what you're doing, but it's not just science. So just to more elaborate on the typical building, so the design predates the internet. It's old stuff. They're inefficient pre-lamp fluorescents. There's no central building management system, and that's just a fancy way of saying there's no computer saying when we should turn on, when we should turn off. It's just mechanical stuff. The thermostats all feed, you know, they're pretty dumb thermostats. They don't have occupancy sensors. And this is important, there's no connectivity. These are dumb buildings. You set them and you forget them. They're not dynamic. So there's no way to sit in a headquarters, a network operating center, and say, what's my building on Stark Street in Houston doing? There's no way to know that. You have to actually go there or call somebody and ask them, is it hot today? Is it cold today? If somebody is cold, the only way to remedy that would be to hire the HVAC company to come out with their truck and their ladder. They go in, they check the thermostats, they check, everything's fine. Maybe it turns out that, you know, Danny was just hot that day, or you know, I was wearing a sweater that day. Maybe Danny should take off a sweater rather than have a $1,200 service charge. So there's no way to get information out of these buildings. There's no connectivity. Everything is reactive rather than predictive. So that's what we're trying to address. There's this huge market opportunity with the Internet of Things. Here's typical energy consumption. You can see lighting, that this 33%, that's an easy place to start. So our entry point is almost always lighting because these sensors, the technology is already there. You can reduce that load dramatically. Cooling and heating, those are harder to deal with because it does get into people's comfort and how do you just upgrade a building to be more efficient around cooling or heating? It's much more expensive than just throwing a sensor on an LED on a light fixture. So we always go in with lighting. In many cases, we extend to web-enabled thermostats, and then in every case, we're dashboarding. We're pulling data out of the building and giving somebody visibility into what's happening there. So, any questions on that stuff or that concept right now? So this kind of gets back to what I think of in terms of how I can work with you guys. I can tell you in my world what we're doing on a daily basis when acquiring new clients or working with an existing client is these steps that we've kind of gone through. So first we do some modeling to measure the opportunity and kind of create the need. So the modeling is to infer what the energy consumption is for that building, or better yet, a whole portfolio of buildings. Maybe there's 250 government buildings that are operated by a real estate investment trust. So of those 250, I need to know I need some inputs. I need to know what the cost of energy is. I need to know what are the energy consuming apparatus in every building. I need to be able to aggregate that, represent it visually, manipulate the numbers, and as you can imagine, there's a whole lot of Excel going on. And so Excel is something that, as primitive as it is, these are a relevant skill set that is not going to die for a long time. And I'll get a little bit more into that later. But the critical path activities that we always go through is we're modeling what could be for a client. And then we're performing site surveys. So that means getting on an airplane, putting on a backpack, getting with an iPad, and we're counting light fixtures. And we're gathering data. Then we go upstairs and get them on the roof. We're cataloging HVAC units, their age, their model, their SEER rating, which is how efficient they are. And then we're also doing something that's interesting. This Energy Star is a ranking that all buildings have this Energy Star, the capacity to be categorized. I'll share a slide on that specifically. But that's a very interesting analytic tool, a yardstick that I think is relevant that some students might be quite interested in. Then the next thing we do is engineering. And so I have an engineering center outside of Chicago, just 2 engineers, and all they're doing is studying spec sheets and taking the data that we've done, and they're coming up with a solution that gives the smart building attributes that the client wants as much as we can give them to meet a certain ROI hurdle. So my job is to find out how much their budget is. If it pays for itself in 6 years, I can give them a whole lot more goodies than if they say this project has to pay for itself in 3 years. So there's always some amount of money that's available. So we get to a specification that matches the client's budget. And then we look at lighting, HVAC, control, and IoT connectivity to give them the ability to manage their portfolio remotely. So that's the stuff we're doing on a daily basis, and we're looking for people that have skill sets that can supplement that can add to that, that can help with that. So Excel is still the beast of burden. A statistical, the capacity to kind of take complex data and express it. And again, that emotional intelligence to be able to interface with the client, whether it's a building operator or a CFO or an owner. You have to have some gravitas. I think you're teaching that. So Energy Star. That's this 0 to 100 score. The average building is a 50. If you are a 75 on the statistical analysis, then you get an Energy Star sticker. And that sticker can mean that the owner of the building can charge more for rent. And in fact, in the federal government, you can get a whole lot more for rent if you have an Energy Star building. So that's one of the things we're trying to do, is help our clients get Energy Star ratings. So I went out with my team and we went to all these government buildings and we did these, what I call efficient enterprise reports. And these are long plane rides and long bus rides. A lot of these are remote. And what would you guess is the average Energy Star rating? About 50%. So our goal, one of the tasks, is that the client says, well, I want you to certify where we are. That's our yardstick. Then where are we going to go? We got to get above 75. So that gets back to that engineering. How do you design a spec that pays for itself within 3 or 4 years that also gives me a 75 Energy Star? So it's a kind of a complex bit of dance there. But that gets into the relevancy of what we're looking for in folks who can do complex things. In the end, what we really have is this neat kind of symbiotic thing where people want smart buildings. They want the Internet of Things. They want to reduce their operating expenses. They want to save the planet. By doing that, you get cash flow from the energy savings. And in fact, that energy savings itself can be collateral for a loan to get the money to do the smart building stuff. So if you have a portfolio that it's a $5 million upgrade on 100 of your buildings, where am I going to get $1 million to do 100 buildings all at once? I've got to run it's just crazy. Believe it or not, your future energy savings after doing this project can be the collateral for the capital. The market wants good investments. This is a great investment. So there's cheap money available. So you can see, I mean, I sound like a snake oil salesman, but it almost is kind of money for nothing. You can get the money, it pays for itself through the savings, and then you end up with all these goodies that you want in your investment. So it's kind of an exciting time to be in my business. I think you might agree. So just last slide here. Relevant knowledge and skills. So the Excel models are still the norm. And we've got some unbelievably complex workbooks that, in fact, every company hires a guru, someone who's just an Excel genius, and they can decode stuff and reverse engineer stuff, and how do you express this, and map that. And so that's exhausting. But, I mean, if you're doing anything in Excel and if some kid shows some promise and interest in it, encourage that. Because he's going to have or she's going to have a job. Web platforms are now, when we're doing energy audits, when a lot of the computing now is happening in the cloud, our proposal generation system is all HTML based. So again, it's that hot rodding, encouraging the folks to do some hacking and some coding early on. It's good stuff. We need that. And then finally, IoT connectivity. Every building, we need to be able to get a signal out. So if I'm going to put my stuff on an existing building network, think maybe Equifax's network, I'll put my stuff on their network, that would be a bad idea. It's an opportunity to hack into Equifax, which is being polite. So frequently what we do is we make it a completely autonomous network, and it's all driven by cellular data in and out. So it's siloing the business and the employee data so that there's air between these two servers. You cannot hack into one through the other. But so people who are able to understand networks and IoT and cellular connections, this is very valuable. The market needs this today, and will need it even more tomorrow. Okay, so then just more questions and answers. I flew through that really fast. I threw a lot of stuff at you. Any questions at this stage?